KJ Method's YouTube channel. What I'd like to do today is to go over an exam together. Hopefully you looked at those prior two videos, part 1 and part 2, where we went over test taking tips and strategies. Now I'd like to put those to use and see if we can answer these questions. What I'll do here is we have a 25 question test. I will put the question up and then give you the opportunity to look at the answers and answer that question before I go over it. So let's get started. Question number 1. Which covenant in a general warranty deed guarantees that the grantor has title to the property and has a right to convey that title to the new owner? Let's take a look at the answers. Covenant of future or further assurances, covenant against encumbrances, covenant of assured ownership, or the covenant of sizing. Let me give you a second on that one so you can take a look at those answers and make your choice. Okay, on this one, I am going to pick the covenant of sizing. If you remember, there are certain covenants that every grantor can give to the grantee when they transfer title to the grantee. The covenant of sizing is the one that says, I own this property and I can convey this property to you. So that one is pure definition. You should have been able to pick covenant of sizing. Question number 2. The property that Sam owns is a servient estate. When he decides to sell the property, which of the following statements would be incorrect? We are looking for the wrong statement. All right, the easement is an appurtenant easement and therefore may have some kind of impact on the future use of the property. The easement is effectively an encumbrance. Easements may have a negative impact on the value of property. A serving estate may prevent the legal transfer of the title to the property to a new owner. What do you guys think? All right, so on this one, I am going to pick D. A serving estate may prevent the legal transfer of title to the property to a new owner. No, we're looking for the incorrect answer. A serving estate cannot prevent the legal transfer to a new owner. The serving estate, the easement, is simply an encumbrance on the property. So it could affect the property value. It will remain with the property. Could have some impact on the future uses of the property, things of that nature, but it cannot prevent the transfer of the property. Question number 3. Which of the following would not be exempt from the Federal Fair Housing Act? Not exempt. Remember, we need to know what they're asking us. Not exempt, meaning it is not an exemption. It is covered, right, by federal fair housing. You don't get an exemption. That's what we're looking for. All right, 4-unit investor-owned apartment building, owner-occupied home being put in the rental market by the owner, a new home community owned by a Catholic church that allows only Catholics to buy, a 4-unit owner-occupied apartment building. Which one do you guys think it is? Okay, the answer to this one would be A, a 4-unit investor-owned apartment building. If you remember, fair housing is to protect people against discrimination, and it's typically residential, right? Regular residential, and we give people certain exemptions. A good way to remember this is we don't want investors, obviously, discriminating. So we don't want to give them an exemption. But let's look at the other ones anyway to make sure we understand. Owner-occupied home. Yes, if you have an owner-occupied home, if you remember, if you're the current resident or the most recent resident, you can discriminate. How about this Catholic church? Yes, If you remember, religious organizations can discriminate as long as they don't discriminate in their membership. And then the 4-unit owner occupied, that would be Mrs. Murphy. Mrs. Murphy's exemption, if she lives there, she can discriminate. The one thing you want to remember here, though, is you never get an exemption based upon race. Okay, so you can discriminate for other reasons under the fair housing protective categories, but not based upon race. Let's look at question number 4. Which federal law regulates credit terms and advertising? This one, students lots of times get this one confused because they get 2 of the federal laws confused. Federal Equal Credit Opportunity, Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, also known as RESPA, Federal Truth in Lending, also known as TILA, Statute of Frauds. All right, you take your stab at it. Which one do you think? Well, this is going to be Federal Truth in Lending, of course. Let's do a process of elimination. I think you all know there's nothing here about a writing, so it's not going to be the Statute of Frauds. Federal Equal Credit Opportunity is when we talk about you have to treat everyone in a protected class fairly when you are trying to give them a loan. We also add a couple of categories there: marriage, age, receipt of public assistance. Besides that, it's pretty much the regular fair housing categories. So it's these last 2, RESPA and TILA. Which one is it? Students get these confused all the time. Well, TILA goes to the credit, right? The loan itself, whereas RESPA goes to the full settlement costs. It's a bigger law. It talks about more things. And so since we're talking about credit terms and advertising, the answer here is going to be TILA, not RESPA. Question number 5. An appraiser reviews the approaches to value and arrives at a final estimate, which indicates the market value of the property. What is this process called? Is it called adjusting the balance, reconciling, plottage, or capitalization? This one is pure definition. So I'll give you a second on this one. Okay, so if you remember with an appraiser, it would be reconciling. What you want to remember here is that appraiser never averages, they reconcile. What does that mean exactly? It means they give the greatest weight to the property that is most like the subject. By process of elimination here, I think you know this is not capitalization or plottage, right? Plottage would go to assemblage. We would get that increase in value. Capitalization, where we're talking about rate and risk, and adjusting the balance is just not a thing, right? It would just be something to confuse you. But one thing I want to say about adjusting the balance, do not pick the answer if you've never heard it before, all right? So let's go with reconciling on that one. Question number 6. Jeff bought 1 unit in a 20-unit property development. When he received his deed, it stated he owned the unit, fee simple, and that he also owned 5% of the other stuff, the grounds, common area, parking lot. What kind of ownership is this that he has? Let's look at our choices. Condominium, fee simple, absolute, cooperative, severalty. This is kind of definition 2, right? So I'll give you a second to answer it, but you should be able to get this answer pretty rapidly. Okay, on this one, it would be condominium. This is pure condominium. How do we know? Process of elimination again. It is not severalty. Severalty just means one, right? There's one person that owns the property, but we're not talking about that here. They're not just talking about just Jeff in isolation owns this property. What is it called? No, we're talking about other things, that he owns it in fee simple and he has a percentage of other things, right? Such as the grounds, the common area, the parking lot. So let's get rid of that one. How about fee simple absolute? Well, it says that he owns it in fee simple for sure. Okay, and so, but that's not exactly what the question is asking. In order for us to get to that answer, fee simple absolute, we would be looking for things such as he owns it without any conditions attached to it, all right? But they're not talking about how he has ownership of the property, right? Not what kind of estate he has. They're talking about what kind of ownership does it represent from this fact pattern. So the last two that we would have is the condominium or the co-op, and these are where students get confused. Well, I want you to look at the terms ownership, 5% of the grounds, common area, parking lot. That would be typical condominium, not co-op. Understand, under co-op, we call it a proprietary lease. You don't own the co-op per se, you own shares in the corporation, right? The not-for-profit or corporation that has built the co-op. So that's why it's not that one. Number 7, which of the following would not be a characteristic of value? If you remember, we have all these characteristics of value, right? So scarcity, actual demand, plottage, utility. What were the characteristics of value? You guys remember what those are? Let me let you take a stab at it. Okay, you should have gotten this one rather quickly. It would have been plottage. If you remember, we have these prerequisites to value. They're called DUST, right? Demand, utility, scarcity, transferability. Plottage is not one of them. Question number 8. The Federal Equal Credit Opportunity Act was created to protect mortgagors in lending. Which of the following would not be protected under this law? We actually just talked about this one in another question. What is this act? Let's talk about it. But receipt of public assistance, marital status, race, sexual orientation. And so what I said to you is under this act, we're going to go for the fair housing categories, and then we're going to add a couple, right? We're going to add age, marital status, receipt of public assistance. And so if we look at that, I'll give you a second to answer it, but I think that you pretty quickly should be able to answer this one. It would be sexual orientation. Unfortunately, we don't protect any sort of sexual orientation. So if you get that answer, always just throw it out. The law hasn't gotten there yet. Question number 9. Which of the following must be present for the valid conveyance of a deed? Let's look at it. The grantor's signature, the grantee's signature, the attestator's signature, the closing attorney's signature, to avoid a forged deed. Well, you probably know that we have all of these elements of a valid deed conveyance. And so what is your answer on this one? You should know that the grantor's signature is always required for the valid conveyance of the deed. The grantor is actually transferring that property from the grantor to the grantee, so their signature is the only one that is required for a valid deed. Now, statutorily, of course, in different states, they will have different requirements, but in every state, we require the grantor to sign the deed. Next one, question number 10. Foreclosure occurs when a blank seizes and sells a borrower's blank after a borrower has failed to blank the lender. Well, that's interesting. Let's look at the answers. A, it could be borrower personal property notify. B, borrower home alert. C, lender property notify. And D, lender collateral repay. I'm going to give you a second on this one. So what did you come up with? I came up with D. Lender, collateral, repay. That's actually the only one that really makes sense. So we say foreclosure occurs when a lender seizes and sells a borrower's collateral, right? Which would have been the home, after the borrower has failed to repay the lender. Number 11, Mark gives April the authority to sign for him in a real estate transaction. April is considered to be Mark's broker, attorney at law, attorney in fact, real estate agent. Let me give you a couple of minutes on that one. Okay, this one's pretty easy. It would be his attorney in fact, also known as power of attorney. So when one person gives someone else authorization to act on their behalf in a real estate transaction, we call that person the power of attorney. Understand it does not have to be an attorney. It could be a friend, family member, and you can limit that power of attorney to say just this one transaction and nothing else. Question number 12. What type of agency is created when a seller signs an exclusive right to sell brokerage agreement with the real estate salesperson with the authority to sign the agreement? And so they're saying there is no agency created until the broker signs the agreement, which makes it valid and binding. It's a general agency, ostensible agency, or special agency. Let me give you a moment on that one. Okay, so the answer here would be it's a special agency. All we're saying is that the seller is signing this exclusive right to sell, and the real estate agent has authority to also sign this agreement. And so we know that it's not general or ostensible. If you remember, general is that ongoing relationship that continues, whereas special is limited in time and scope, because sellers just want you to sell their house. Once the house is sold, the agency is over, so it's a special agency. It's not ostensible. Ostensible is when you lead a party to believe that you're the agent when you're not. And then A, it says there is no agency until the broker signs. Well, that's not true if the broker gave authority to the salesperson. And in this case, the broker has done just that. Let's look at number 13. For tax purposes, the initial cost of an investment property plus the cost of any improvements minus any depreciation deductions to the property represents the investment's adjusted basis, capital gains, equity, or salvage value. Well, the answer here, you should know it, this should be a quick one, low-hanging fruit, would be the adjusted basis. Adjusted basis. All right, so we're not talking about a profit here. We're just saying what is the cost when you put in any improvements minus the depreciations. That's your adjusted basis, what you have in the property, right? If it was asking how much you sold it for, how much you made on the property, then we'd be looking at capital gains. All right, equity is how much you have in the property unencumbered. Unencumbered. So this does not let us know that this is an equity situation or what the equity is, because the initial cost could have been financed, the improvements could have been financed. So it's not their equity, it's their adjusted basis. And salvage value being the cost of the property dismantled and moved. So we have no indication of that either. Let's look at question 14. With regards to dual agency, which of the following answers is correct? Dual agency must be disclosed within 3 days of making the application for the loan. Dual agency is illegal. Dual agency must be disclosed prior to submission of an offer and must be with the informed consent of all parties. Dual agency must be disclosed after an offer has been submitted to the seller. Let me give you an opportunity to answer that one. Okay, so of course here it would be C. Dual agency must be disclosed prior to submission. So dual agency is when we have that one agent in a brokerage who is representing, meaning client, right, or principal, on both sides of the transaction, right? You're representing both the seller and the buyer. Can you do it? Sure, you can do it. It's not illegal, but you must disclose it. Undisclosed dual agency is illegal. And so it must be fully disclosed prior to the submission of the offer, and all the parties have to consent to the dual agency. Number 15, all of the following would be considered latent defects except inadequate electrical wiring, a crack in the foundation that was covered by a large painting, outdated appliances. The property across the street was recently rezoned for a chicken processing plant. What do you think? Okay, outdated appliances. Now this question's a little tricky in this regard. If you remember, latent defects are those defects which you can't see. Some of these are arguable, right? Like maybe the property being rezoned for a chicken plant, you probably could have checked that out and saw that that was the case. So how do you answer these questions? If you know that you have to disclose latent defects and you don't have to disclose patent defects. Patent defects are the ones that are clearly visible, right? So just go for the answer that is clear. It is clear that if appliance is outdated, it is a patent defect, not a latent defect, or something that you can see versus something that you cannot see. All right, so all of the following would be considered latent except this one, which would be the outdated appliances. And that's the way you're going to have to answer a question, even if you don't always love the answers. Question number 16. You have signed a listing agreement with your seller. Which of the following are you allowed to do? Advertise the property for sale at a price that will generate the highest number of offers. Market the property according to the terms of the contract. Accept an offer on your client's behalf as long as it was agreed upon listing price. Tell the other agents that your client's asking price is negotiable. Let me give you a moment on that one. Again, here, this one is pretty simple, right? Just look for that most positive answer, which is going to be you're allowed to operate in accordance with the terms of the contract. Anything that's kind of like, I'm not really sure, don't pick that answer. They just want to know which one. So go ahead and find the definitive answer, and you know that you can perform according to the contract. Number 17, which of the following is a physical characteristics of land? This one you should know: quick and dirty, nice and easy, immobility, scarcity, situs, return on investment. I'm not even giving you time on this one because these are those low-hanging fruit. You need to be able to answer this question in 10 seconds and then move on to the next one. So we got immobility. We're going to take that time that we had to answer this question and move it right over to the next question. 18, Vincent's property has been taken by the government to build an on-ramp to a nearby highway. The government has this right by the government's right of escheat, police power, eminent domain, adverse possession. Which one do you think? This should also be very quick for you. Okay, the answer here, of course, is going to be eminent domain. Anytime you see a taking, the government is allowed to take your property, right? As long as it's private property, public use, just compensation, that's going to be eminent domain. Too many students get police power and eminent domain confused. They are not the same thing. They're not even close to the same thing. With eminent domain, they're taking your property. You are not going to have your property any longer. But with police power, they're just putting pressure on your property. They're telling you how you can use it, how you can't use it. Two very different things. Under police power, you do not get compensated. Under eminent domain, you do. A sheet, you know that is if you have no heirs, it's going to revert to the state government. Adverse possession is when you openly, continuously use another person's property, right? Essentially, you move into that property with the intention of taking title to that property after a certain statutory period of time. Question number 19. How is net income calculated on an operating statement? Net income, how is that calculated? You take the annual gross income minus the operating losses, that'll give you the net operating income. Effective gross income minus vacancy and collection losses will give you net operating income. Effective gross income minus potential gross income will give you net operating income. Potential gross income minus vacancy and collections minus operating expenses will give you net operating income. Which one do you think? This is simply, do you have the formula in your head, right? How do you get net operating income? And the answer to this one would be D. For net operating income, we are going to take the potential gross income on the property, how much you could make if everything was perfect. We're going to take away the vacancies and collection losses on that property. We're going to also minus the expenses, the fixed, variable, and reserve expenses. When we put it all in the bag, we shake it up. What is left? Net operating income. All right, number 20. Producers enter the market, creating excess supply, which results in a decrease in profits. The result is that producers will then leave the market. What is this called? The principle of decreasing returns, the principle of competition, the principle of plottage, the principle of anticipation. This is a good question. Take your time. Okay, you should know that this is the principle of competition. It's essentially what we've been seeing a long time, right? In the most recent past, right? In real estate, you see all of these builders coming out of nowhere, right? Everybody is trying to fill the demand that we have in the market. But after a period of time, the supply is going to exceed the demand, and then everyone's profits are going to drop, right? You're going to start seeing empty houses or too many houses that were built, and now we don't have anybody to move into those houses, right? And so then the prices will begin to drop. Who knows how long that'll be before it happens, but that is the principle of competition. Decreasing returns is when you put too much into a property, you over-improve a property. Principle of plottage, there really isn't anything called a principle of plottage. We do have plottage, which means that you assembled properties. You put two pieces of property together or two pieces of land together. You have an increase in value. You now have plottage. Principle of anticipation is primarily what we use under the income approach, where we anticipate the value of property. We're saying, okay, maybe it's not doing as great right now, but the rents could go up. We can make money doing this. We can make money doing that on this property. And so it's going to be appraised according to the anticipated value, not so much what it's doing right now. Question number 21. A husband and wife can hold title to property in all of the following ways, except, let's look at the answers. Joint tenancy, tenants in common, tenancy at will, tenants by the entirety. Oh, well, this is one you should be able to quickly answer right off the top, okay? Because you cannot own property in tenancy at will. So you should have been able to say tenancy at will, that's a tenancy. You can't own property that way. But of course, a husband and wife, the one we most think about is tenants by the entirety, but there are some states that do not honor and do not have tenants by the entirety, so you got to take the property some other kind of way, right? You could take it tenants in common, you could take it by joint tenancy, but you know you cannot own property by tenancy at will. Number 22. Which of the following would not correctly describe an easement? An easement is not an estate in land. An easement is always considered an encumbrance. An easement appurtenant will run with the land. An easement must either be dominant or servient. What do you think? This is a good question. All right. How about D? An easement must either be a dominant or servient estate. Let's look at them. We're looking for the thing that is wrong. An easement is not an estate in land. That is correct. If you remember, in order for it to be an estate, you have to have a current or future right to occupy. Can you occupy an easement? No, you cannot. You can use an easement, and so it is not considered an estate in land. Let's look at B. An easement is always considered an encumbrance. Oh yeah, that is true. All right, and so we're looking for the thing that is not true. Easements definitively are encumbrances for the period of time that they are on the property. An easement appurtenant will run with the land. That's true. That's what appurtenant means, right? Runs with the land. So we know that that's true. We were looking for the thing that was false. The last one is an easement must either be a dominant or servient estate, and that is not always true. In other words, when we talk about easements in gross, we don't typically utilize that terminology, dominant or servient estates. Typically, you just see that terminology in easement appurtenances where we're talking about two parcels of land, two property owners that are next to each other. All right, number 23. You want to operate a daycare facility from your home that is owned residential. What would you need to obtain in order to legally operate the daycare? A non-conforming use certificate, an upzoning permit, a variance, a special assessment waiver. This one should be real easy for you to grab, right? Some of these we don't even talk about, but should be easy that you understand. In order to do something different for your own personal property, you are going to need a variance in order to do it. It's not a change of zoning, it's just asking whether you can do something that is different from the present zoning. Number 24. You're looking to list a 5-bedroom, 1-bath house. What type of depreciation would you consider this? This is a good question. Physical, economic, functional, or environmental depreciation. I'll give you a second. This is also one you should be able to know very quickly. Okay, the answer here is functional. Functional obsolescence, let's go over them. Functional is how the property functions to today's standards, right? You may see terms like contemporary standards, but how it functions to today's standards. 5 bedrooms, 1 bath. The property is still on oil as opposed to natural gas. The property has very, very small bedrooms, a poor residential floor plan. That's what you're looking for. Many students get functional and physical confused. They are not the same thing. Functional, the house could be in perfect condition. There's nothing wrong with it. But it's the way it functions is not so good. Physical, there's something wrong with the house. It's wear and tear. It's a broken window, saggy floors. It's a leaky roof. Economic would be something external to the property, like it is next to a prison. It has very high taxes in that area. Nothing is selling in that area. And then environmental depreciation is not a thing. Don't pick that answer. Next one. Number 25, Sally gives Paul a 1-year option to buy her lake home for $700,000. This is an example of what type of contract? Unilateral contract, executed contract, bilateral contract, exception contract. I'll give you a second on that one. Okay, this would be an example of a unilateral contract. Why do I say that? You need to know all option contracts are unilateral. They're all unilateral. All right, and what do we mean by a unilateral contract? Only one side to that contract has made a promise or is obligated. And so when you buy an option for someone, what did you buy? You bought the option. Do you have to exercise the option? No. Could you? Sure. If you want to, does the person who gave you the option have to let you? Yes, they do. So there's only one side that is obligated under the contract. Executed contract would simply mean a contract that has been performed. It's totally finished. There's nothing left to do. Bilateral contract, both sides to the contract are making promises to one another. And exception contract is not a thing. Well, that's it for today, guys. How'd you do on that one? Make sure to go back over your test to see where you went wrong. You take the number correct over 25 if you want to figure out your score. So if you got 23 correct, you put 23 in the calculator first, divide it by 25. That'll give you that decimal. If you looked at one of the past videos, you'll know how to convert that decimal to a percentage, and you know how well you've done. All right, so thank you again for coming to the KJ Methods YouTube channel. Make sure to like this video and also subscribe so that you are informed every time we upload a new video. Thanks again, guys. See you next week.